This is a sermon from St. Paul's Church, Brookfield, Connecticut, transforming lives through Jesus. For more information, go to www.stpaulsbrookfield.com.
Hallelujah, Lord. Come and open our hearts and take us on this incredible journey with your Son. Amen. So in the strange world of hospital chaplains, pastoral care chaplains in a hospital system, well, we tend to be kind of like stepchildren, or like Cinderella. We don't usually have a big enough presence to stand departmentally on our own. So eventually we get kind of placed under somebody else's supervision. Now in some hospitals, chaplains are placed under the person who supervises the care managers and the social workers, and sometimes they're under mission integration. At the little hospitals that I serve, we're under behavioral health. Now I want you to just think about that for a second. The person in charge of the chaplains is the person in charge of mental health. I don't know, I think it's funny. Anyway, that's not really the point. The point is that last October, we got a new supervisor. And she has all these behavioral health units, these mental health units to worry about. She might think, well, chaplains could easily be little stepchildren. But that's not, she took the opposite approach. She said, wait a second, why aren't you on that committee? Why aren't you on that committee? And I need to raise your profile across the system, and your voice needs to be heard, not hidden. And then she goes, I have no stepchildren. I have no stepchildren. Well, that's my lead-in for the sermon today, because God has no stepchildren. Okay? That's what our lessons are about today. God has no stepchildren. And anytime you're talking about Romans, you're already talking about something that's a little complicated. So we're not only going to talk about Romans, we're also going to talk about the gospel. So fasten your seatbelts. Paul in Romans goes to great lengths to make this point about there being no stepchildren in God's kingdom. And it can be a very complicated and complex argument that he's spitting out. Behind it all, the question is, well, why did God do it this way? So we have Paul, and then we're gonna get into Jesus in the Gospels. He's criticizing the Pharisees as blind guides. And then he turns around and tells the Canaanite woman that he only came for the lost sheep, even though he just was criticizing them for being blind guides. And if it seems like how are we going to line these up? That's what Paul is doing in Romans, is lining this up. How can Jesus say, I came to the lost sheep, and Paul goes, and the gospel's for everybody? That's what we're going to figure out today, this alignment. N.T. Wright calls it God's apparent strange design. I really like that phrase. You're going to hear that a lot today. God's apparent strange design. And every time God's apparent strange design shows up, it follows a similar pattern. So we're going to look at that pattern, and we're going to start with Joseph. Joseph, as we heard in last week's reading, Joseph, as a young man, had these dreams, these visions, prophetic visions from God. Not just kind of regular, oh, that was an interesting dream, but clear, vivid, prophetic visions from God. Visions in which the stars and the moons bowed down before him. Visions in which the sheaves of the wheat that represented his brothers bowed down before his sheaf of wheat. And the clear interpretation is that Joseph was somehow going to be raised up in some manner above the rest of his family, and his rest of his family were going to be humbled before him. Well, his brothers were not highly in favor of this plan. They reacted badly. We heard last week they sold their brother into slavery, and they allowed their father to think he'd been killed by a wild animal. It was not their finest moment, and frankly, they had many not very fine moments, and this was not their finest moment. So years later, our story picks up today. They come to Egypt because of the famine. Joseph puts them through many tests, and finally, he can't stand it anymore, and he has to tell them who he is. And it's in this moment that Joseph clearly understands what his brothers never would really grasp, is that God had a much bigger plan. And it wasn't so much that the evil the brothers intended is what ruled the day. It's that what they did to Joseph was necessary to begin to put into motion God's plan that would not only save them, but would save God's people. This plan that seemed evil, sending Joseph into slavery, Joseph spending all those years in prison, was necessary not only for the saving of his family, but out of his family came God's people, out of God's people came David, and on into Jesus, who was going to save the world. At this point, this plan had to kick into motion in this way. And Joseph understood this, that it was for the saving of many survivors. And that this was God's plan and not his brother's plan. The early church saw the story of Joseph as a prefiguring of the story of Jesus. The same kind of Joseph who left his family, was sold into slavery, horribly imprisoned, but was risen up to a position to save his people. And Jesus, leaving his heavenly home and coming down and being badly treated and dying on the cross, but being raised again in order to save God's people. And they saw clearly that this is the pattern of God's apparent strange design. Now, one thing that we want to notice is that God works this design through the lives of individuals. It's a double, the pattern of the individual, Joseph's life. The pattern of working through Jesus, working through individuals. God works through us as individuals. God also used the nation of Israel. In between Joseph and Jesus was the nation of Israel. And God used the nation in the same way. We're going to see more about that later. But God said, I've got this problem. I'm going to solve this problem through my son, but I'm also going to solve it through creation. And that's working through creation, working through individuals, working through Israel. That is God's apparent strange design. So part of what Paul is trying to deal with in the complicated book of Romans is, if in fact we take it as a given that God is working through Israel in order to bring salvation, that through Israel the Messiah came bringing salvation for all, if that is the given assumption, then why has Israel rejected the Messiah? Why does so many of the Jewish people turn away? And he's trying to also answer the question, if God is working through Israel, how does the Gentile piece come in? And how does God do all of this, making sure that there are no stepchildren? Okay? If God has his chosen people and it's all happening through them, how do the Gentiles come in as equals? It is. And it's a complicated knot that Paul is trying to figure out. So, this apparent strange design is the same for Jesus and Joseph, and Paul goes to great lengths in the letter to say this is the same pattern for Israel. And basically what Paul is saying is Israel, the nation, started out up here in the heights, God's chosen people, the Exodus, the being taken to the promised land, and yet here they are kind of at their low point, rejecting the Messiah. And he's saying, we haven't quite gotten to the other end of the pattern for them, but he says the other end of the pattern is that the Jewish nation Israel, God's chosen people, will come to the place that they will complete this pattern for themselves, and it will be for their salvation. And part of God's strange design is, in this part down here where they're rejecting, that's where and how God brings in the Gentiles. Okay, you with me so far? See, it could have been easy for Paul as he goes out on his missionary journey. Everywhere he went first to the synagogues and preached to the Jews, and then when they rejected, he went out to the Gentiles. And the church outside of Israel it wasn't totally a Gentile church, but it was largely a Gentile church. And so Paul has to wrestle with the whole idea of, well, did the Israel, in rejecting the Messiah, is God simply starting over the Gentiles? Did Israel lose its chance and said, forget that, we're going to work with the Gentiles now, I'm tired of working with them? And Paul says, no, that is not how covenants work. That's not how God's apparent strange design works. And all through Romans, he's building this case. He's using the law, he's using the prophets, he's using the psalm to prove his point that God's strange design from the beginning included the plan to bring in the Gentiles. And from the beginning, the design was that for a time being, God's people would turn away, would reject God's plan. From the beginning. And it's easy enough for us to understand and see, because we read the lessons from Isaiah, and that God has planned to bring in the Gentiles all along. And we focus on that because that's us. And so we're hugely grateful that this was part of God's plan to include us all along. Paul said it is equally part of God's strange design that his people would reject him. So that's really, Paul is really trying to puzzle this. And part of how he puzzles it is by defining who true Israel is. The children of Abraham, the children of faith. Not all in Israel, he says, are true Israel. And not all the Gentiles that goes and preach to are going to be true Israel. But there's going to be a remnant from both that will make up true Israel. And what he says is, why does it have to be God's plan that his people would reject him? And if you could imagine for a minute, Israel, when Jesus came, if all of Israel had gone, oh, yes, the Messiah, yes, then grace would have been still in the context of, this is God's privileged people. Grace would have been in that context. It would have been hung up there. The Gentiles would always have been second-class add-on citizens. So in order for the Gentiles to be full-fledged members, it had to be outside of just Israel. So Israel had to reject it so it could be opened up. So Paul says, so this is why that was part of God's plan, because it was the only way to level the playing field. But then he goes on, he says to the Gentiles, okay, but listen, you Gentiles, you're going to fall into a different trap. You're going to fall into the trap of thinking that God did away with the Israel and picked you instead, and you're all better because you've got the faith. And he said, no. That's not how it works. Israel is God's chosen vine. You're the wild ones. You're grafted on. And in olive trees, the usual process is opposite. You would take a wild tree because it was healthy and strong and vital, and but maybe not good fruit, and you'd put on the good fruit and you'd graft that on and get the strength. And Paul's turning the analogy backwards, and he says, the vine, the cultivated vine, is the strong one, and you're wild. You don't know how to produce fruit, but we're going to put you onto this tree that will help you produce the fruit. He goes, don't you ever forget that you're not the principal vine. Okay? So how does God make sure there are no stepchildren in his kingdom? He levels the playing field. And that's what our passage today is about. And you had to read it very carefully to make your way through it, because it was this and this and this and this. Just as you were once disobedient to God. He's talking to the Gentiles. Just as you were once disobedient to God, but have now received mercy because of their, Israel's, disobedience. So they, Israel, are now disobedient, in order that, by the mercy shown to you, they too may now receive mercy. And here's the key verse. For God has imprisoned all in disobedience, so that he may be merciful to all. How does God level the playing field? By trapping all in disobedience, so that all are equal in their need for mercy. And then, graciously pouring out that mercy. So, now let's go back to Jesus. He's criticizing the Pharisees. Now, the general complaint is the purity laws, the hand washing and the cup washing and the making sure that everything is clean. And Jesus says, you guys have gotten it backwards. It's not what comes in that's clean, but what comes out that's clean. And kind of what he's criticizing them for is that they're not, the whole point of the purity laws of doing this cleansing is to realize, I'm not clean inside. I have all these horrible thoughts and feelings and intentions. And I need mercy and grace. But they've turned it around and they've made it about what's on outside. And see, Israel, as the chosen people, have a given role in this strange design. In this strange design, they are to model to the world what the effects of sin, the knowledge that we need mercy and grace, and that we have a relationship with God who's in covenant with us. And their job is to model this to the world. And Jesus is really criticizing them for not modeling it to the world. Instead of modeling it in a way that makes everyone else want to come in, they've drawn the lines around it and said, we're God's special people, and this is who we are, and good luck getting it. They've not fulfilled their role in being chosen. And that's really what Jesus is criticizing them for, which is why it connects us immediately into this story about the Canaanite woman. They've left Jewish territory, they're in Canaanite territory, and this woman comes yelling, screaming, begging, pleading, help my daughter. And Jesus says this strange thing that most of us kind of go, this doesn't sound like Jesus to me. What is he talking about? And he says, I was sent only for the lost sheep of Israel. He is going to ignore her totally. He's not going to answer until she makes such a nuisance of herself. So I was sent to the lost sheep of Israel only. Why did he say this? Because of God's apparent strange design. God has set up the nation of Israel to be the mechanism for which the Messiah will come, will bring the message, will be offered as a sacrifice. It's through Israel. So the message has to go to Israel first. This fulfillment of the plan of using Israel for the salvation of the world, that has to happen first. And that's kind of what Jesus is saying. Because if the message didn't go to Israel, then it would be implying that God had made a mistake in choosing Israel as the mechanism for his salvation. And if God all of a sudden started, I've got to get rid of these people, they're driving me crazy, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. If he did the work around Israel, he would not be keeping his covenant. And as we heard in Scripture today, these covenants that God made with his people, with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, covenant was unbreakable. This has always been the plan, always was the plan, to work through Israel. And Jesus is saying, I am working God's plan as God laid it out. Okay, so maybe Jesus wasn't being so mean in saying this, okay? Now the wonder of this story to me is not so much this Canaanite woman's persistent, the way she made a nuisance of herself, but it's in her understanding. Jesus says, I came for the lost sheep of Israel. She gets it. The Pharisees didn't get it. Israel didn't get it. She gets it. She understands this is God's mechanism. God has a chosen people. Out of the chosen people, God has this person standing in front of her who is clearly the Messiah. She understands that that's how salvation is going to work. N.T. Wright says, she clearly saw, if Israel is indeed the promise-bearing people, then Israel's Messiah would bring blessings to the world. The dogs will share the scraps. She understands at the moment that she is the dog, outside of the promise, outside of the kingdom, outside. It doesn't, but she also understands that if this is true, then eventually it's going to mean salvation for her. She's saying, I want it now. My daughter needs it now. See, Jesus, in this story, he's working the salvation story the way God has set it up. He's working salvation out through Israel. He is pre-crucifixion. He's working the plan as God set it out. The disciples aren't ready for Calvary. They don't know it's coming. Jesus is still working it. He's not at Calvary yet. But this woman, N.T. Wright says this, she's insisting on Easter. She sees far enough out to see the implications, to see the end, and she goes, it needs to break in now. I need it to break in now. So on the other side of Easter, God's mechanism for working this is complete. On the other side of Easter, Paul writes, there are no stepchildren. This woman is saying, the kingdom has to break in now. It's so powerful, it has to break in now. You and I are part of the true Israel, Paul says, because in God's apparent strange design, we were called and we have answered, and we know that our Savior gives us salvation and mercy and grace and forgiveness. And yet Paul warns us not to take this for granted. He said the reason the Pharisees were blind is they took their part in God's plan for granted. And Paul says, you Gentiles, don't take it for granted. You're grafted on. And if those original branches weren't bearing fruit and were cut off, you don't think God can cut off a grafted branch that doesn't bear fruit? Well, I have to say, I've thought a lot about that this week. Because it has been a sobering week. Between Barcelona and Charlottesville, it's been very sobering. And I can see, as a nation, founded with some understanding of God's grace and our part in God's story, it seems to me when I look at Charlottesville, I'm looking at a people who once understood grace and have turned from it. I don't know how else to explain Charlottesville. But as an example of what happens when we don't bear fruit and we don't stay connected to the true vine. And yet, in all of this, I still see God's apparent strange design. The pattern is still there and the pattern still works. Because it's only in this part of our story, as a nation, as individuals, that same pattern works for all of us. And it's down here in the hard part that we get shaped. That's where we get shaped. That's where we learn we need mercy. We need grace. We need forgiveness. We're up here all the time. We don't learn that lesson. It's down here in the trough, in the trenches, that we learn that lesson. And the other side of the pattern happens too. It's not just that we get down here and we're like, oh, I really need God. I need mercy. I need grace. It's that as God lifts us up, we become part of that instrument of salvation for other people. Okay? Just as Joseph became an instrument, and Israel was meant to be an instrument, and Jesus is an instrument, that pattern continues for all of us. And we encounter God at that moment of need. And over, this pattern happens. We encounter God in that moment of need, And out of that need, and out of encountering God's mercy and grace in new ways and in deeper ways, we come out on the other side as instruments for God's salvation. That's how we live our lives, for the sake of the kingdom, that others may receive salvation. So we have to understand both our need for grace and our role in God's strange design, because this is what we model to the world, and this is what we have to offer to our country in the light of Charlottesville, is modeling this to the world, that we cannot presume on God's grace because we were founded as a country that way. We can't assume, even as Christians, on God's grace. And I think a lot of what happened is people just kind of presuming that God's grace is still available to them, when they haven't gone into the trenches and said, I need mercy and grace. And it's like the formula, getting half the formula right. We get down here and we learn that we cannot presume on God's grace, but we also learn that God's grace is fully there for us. And we come out trusting that God's grace is fully there for us. We don't presume on it, and yet it's given and we receive it and we treasure it. And it's the getting both parts of the formula that are important. And the Pharisees didn't get both sides of the formula. And I think many in our country today take the general sense of, we've been a Christian nation. I mean, I know you've heard it. Everyone is loved by God. Everybody's a child of God. Therefore, everybody's going to go to heaven and be saved. And it doesn't matter so much how I live my life, because God's going to love us and save us all. And it's presuming on God's grace without doing the necessary repentance and calling out to God and becoming, through faith in Christ, a member of Christ's body. So many in our culture today, I meet them all the time in the hospital, they presume on this general cultural understanding of God's grace without understanding the whole pattern and the whole picture. So back to, there are no stepchildren in God's kingdom. There's no stepchildren in God's kingdom. Doesn't mean that everybody is part of God's kingdom. But it means when we enter God's kingdom, we are all on an equal basis, because we all are in need of the grace poured out by our Savior Jesus Christ. And in this, the Canaanite woman is our model. Not to presume. In fact, to presume otherwise. To presume I don't deserve this. But the nature of grace is that it is poured out on me when I least presume that I deserve it. That is what we have to offer the world. So in the strange apparent design that God has for your life, where you're struggling to learn that God's grace is there for you, know that it is given freely. And that is what you offer to the world when you go out.